Dr. Hardesty, would you start by describing what archival records are and why a researcher in HDFS would want to use them?
Yes, so archival records are like documents that are kept for years and years to document, like, for example, in the research that I do, are records that are used to document what's going on in the court system in terms of decision-making processes. Other archival records could be like police records, marriage records, records that libraries keep, like historical type records, but they're basically existing data that are documented and retained over time.
By someone other than the researcher, right? By a
Yeah.
government or an
Yeah.
agency or
And
something. Mhm.
they're also, like in my specific case, I usually call them administrative data.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
there are other types,
Mhm.
but that's the kind of data that I work with.
I see. Well, why would a scientist want to use records that somebody else collected for an administrative purpose?
Yeah. So in my case, it allows us to get somewhat of an objective look at what's going on in the court system. It's not completely objective because these are information that's being recorded by someone and they are choosing how to record this information. But it allows us to get just clear information about what kinds of decisions are being made in court cases without being filtered through the person telling us what's happening in the courtroom, but we're getting kind of this factual documentation of what's happening. It also allows you to look over years to see how things might change by collecting that information that might be more difficult to get by interviewing people or having people fill out survey data.
Do you have to get permission from people to look at their court records?
No, they're public record, and that will vary by county. I think in probably most counties, divorce records are public record. And the county where I collected the data, all of those are public record, and they're publicly, some of the information is publicly accessible online. You can go to the circuit clerk website and search divorce records and bring up a divorce record and review part of it. But to get the full file, you have to go to the courthouse and request the file, and you have to sit in this little room and look at it. You can't take it with you. And that's what we did. And we collected data from 620 divorce records. And so we had graduate students and undergraduate students sitting in this little room extracting that data onto sheets.
So they had a sheet that had a bunch of questions that needed to be answered by looking through the file.
Yeah, and you asked if we have to have permission. It's really fascinating. We don't have to ask anyone for this because it's public record. And so we have the data that we collected from women previously. They participated in the study before we collected all this court record data. So no, we didn't have to ask them.
What safeguards do you take to protect their privacy?
A lot. So as you can imagine, there's lots of juicy details in divorce records, there's protection, shocking, upsetting, sad information, sometimes crazy information. You can only talk about that information with other people on the lab. You can't go posting on Facebook saying, oh my gosh, you'd never believe what I saw in this case. You can't mention names or talk about cases outside of the lab because, small communities, people overhear something. They may know you're talking about that person. And we also will come across records of people we know. And so we have to be very careful with that information. Everything that we extract, we substitute all the names and everything with case numbers, things like that. So we don't have identifying information on anything that's like hard copies. We have something that links it. But what I have to tell students is even though this is publicly available to everyone, we have a responsibility to be respectful with that information. So even if somebody were to get a guide, an extraction guide, and see the data that we extracted, we really wouldn't be violating anything because it's publicly available, but it's not morally right, ethically right for us to do that. So we treat it just like it's confidential, non-publicly available info. I will say that collecting data from administrative archival records is much more challenging than I ever would have guessed. Especially court records, they are messy. They're inconsistent across case to case in the way that things are recorded. It has been a monster to collect this data. So I would, it might seem like my dog's drinking water in the background if you hear her. It may seem like that might be an easier way to collect data, but it's it was completely new. You have to learn a lot of new jargon. And it was challenging.
Yeah. I've done some work with medical records and going through medical charts, and I assume they're similar in that it depends a little bit on just the staff member or the medical doctor and how much they recorded, and if they did it right then, or if they saved up all their files for the day and then tried to do them in a rush at the end. And you don't know which is which, but you suspect that some people are keeping better records than others.
Yeah, it's similar.
Yeah. It's interesting, at the beginning you said one of the advantages of archival records is that it's somewhat objective. And yet, as you were talking about the stuff that gets kept out of them, I was thinking, well, it's not objective at all, is it? It's
right. It's a different kind of, it has different limitations from like your interviews with a person face to face. Like, there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on with records. Who gets to decide what kinds of things get recorded and how. And it's not recorded for research purposes. And so it's recorded for, whatever purpose they have in collecting this. And so it has limitations, but you're so right. I mean, it's biased, but just in a different way.
Right. So it doesn't exactly tell you if there was violence in a family. It's not objective about that at all. It's just objective about what the court knew and when they knew it and how they decided, right? It's objective about that.
Like, we can ask women, and we do see some of this. We ask them, what was the final custody arrangement? And what women tell us versus what's actually documented in the court records, it can be very different. And a lot of that has to do with women not really understanding all of the nuances of a custody agreement. Like, they might say it's 50-50, but then when you look, it's actually not 50-50. Or they may say they got sole custody, but maybe they got physical custody, but they share legal custody. And so depending on, education levels, there just may be variation in how much they understand that what happened. And also, women will tell you about various things that happen in court in which they felt like they were ignored or dismissed. But then you don't really get this necessarily from the archival records, but there's procedural processes that may not allow certain things to come in. And so there's just these are two different worldviews on the same experience. And it kind of gives you two sides.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.